The journey to Murasaki was unlike any other I'd ever undertaken. The road wound through dense forests, each turn revealing more of the mist-shrouded mountains that had always been a mystery to the outside world. When I first heard of the village, it was from an old woman who spoke in hushed tones, as if she feared even mentioning its name might summon something dreadful. She warned me not to go, but her words only deepened my curiosity. The allure of uncovering the truth behind the legends was irresistible. The village of Murasaki was tucked away in a hidden valley, almost as if it were deliberately trying to hide from the world. When I finally arrived, the scene that greeted me was both haunting and beautiful. Traditional wooden houses, some on the verge of collapse, lined narrow streets that had long been overtaken by nature. The air was thick with fog, and a silence hung over the village that felt unnatural. It was as if time itself had forgotten this place. My first steps into the village were tentative, every sound magnified by the quiet. The few remaining residents I encountered were elderly, their faces lined with age and something else, fear, perhaps, or the weight of memories they couldn't escape. They stared at me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, whispering amongst themselves in a dialect that was foreign even to my trained ear. I tried to ask them about the temple, but they averted their eyes, muttering something about leaving before nightfall. I wasn't alone in my quest to uncover the truth of Murasaki. A team of paranormal investigators had agreed to join me, their curiosity piqued by the village's dark history. We were an odd mix-me, a writer in search of a story, and them, experts in the unexplainable. They had all the gear, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and a slew of other gadgets that I couldn't even name. But as we ventured deeper into the village, it became clear that none of that would matter here. The temple stood on a hill overlooking the village, its ancient bell tower barely visible through the mist. The path leading to it was overgrown and treacherous, as if nature itself was trying to keep us away. The locals had refused to guide us, but that didn't deter us. As we climbed, the air grew colder, and the silence around us deepened, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. By the time we reached the temple, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at our feet. The temple was a masterpiece of old-world architecture, but years of neglect had taken their toll. The wooden beams were rotting, and the once vibrant paintings that adorned the walls had faded almost beyond recognition. Yet there was something undeniably majestic about the place, a sense of reverence that lingered even in its decay. But there was also something else, a feeling that we were not welcome, that we had trespassed into a place that was not meant to be disturbed. As we stood before the temple's entrance, the lead investigator, Takashi, suggested we split up to cover more ground. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I agreed, knowing it was the most efficient way to gather information. The others scattered, each heading off in a different direction, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wandered through the temple's corridors, my footsteps echoing eerily in the empty space. The air was thick with the scent of incense, long since burned away but lingering like a ghost. I found myself drawn to the bell tower, the place where the heart of the legend supposedly resided. The stairs leading up were steep and narrow, each step creaking ominously under my weight. As I climbed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though every time I turned around, there was nothing but shadows. By the time I reached the top, I was out of breath, more from the tension than the physical exertion. The bell tower was small, barely big enough to hold the massive bell that dominated the space. It was an impressive piece of craftsmanship, its surface covered in intricate carvings that told stories of gods and demons. But what drew my attention most was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a soft sobbing that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart raced as I scanned the room, searching for the source, but there was nothing. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, something brushed against my arm, a light touch, like a hand trying to get my attention. I spun around, but the room was empty, save for the bell and the beams of light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate, and I could feel my resolve starting to waver. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I reached out to touch the bell, half expecting it to be cold and lifeless. But to my surprise, it was warm, almost as if it were alive. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I pulled my hand back, unnerved by the sudden change in atmosphere. It was then that I noticed something strange. Carved into the base of the bell was a name, almost entirely worn away by time, but still legible. Aiko. The name sent a chill down my spine. It was the name of the woman from the legend, the one who had died a tragic death after being betrayed by her lover. I had heard the story before, but standing there, in the very place where it had all happened, made it feel all too real. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. I descended the stairs in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. The others were waiting for me at the bottom, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. I told them what I had found, and though they tried to hide it, I could see the fear in their eyes. We were all experienced in our own ways, but this was different. This was something none of us had prepared for. Takashi suggested we regroup outside, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the temple. As we stepped out into the cool night air, the fog had thickened, turning the village into a maze of shadows and half-seen shapes. We gathered in a circle, sharing our findings. Each of us had experienced something strange, something that couldn't be explained by the usual tricks of the mind. It was clear that the village held more secrets than we had anticipated. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, and the mist seemed to close in around us. We huddled together, trying to make sense of what we had uncovered. The villagers had warned us, but we had brushed off their fears as mere superstition. Now, I wasn't so sure. There was something about this place that defied logic, something that made even the most rational among us question our sanity. Takashi suggested we return to the temple in the morning, hoping that the daylight might offer some clarity. But as we prepared to settle in for the night, a sound broke through the silence. The tolling of a bell, deep and resonant, echoing through the valley. We exchanged nervous glances, knowing full well that the bell hadn't rung in years. Yet here it was, clear as day, a reminder that we were not alone. The sound of the bell faded into the distance, leaving us in an uneasy silence. No one wanted to be the first to speak, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Takashi broke the tension, suggesting that we keep watch in shifts. It was a practical solution, but it did little to ease our nerves. We were all on edge, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending our hearts racing. My turn to keep watch came in the early hours of the morning, the time when the world is at its darkest and the mind plays tricks on you. I sat by the fire, staring out into the fog, straining to see beyond the veil of mist. The village was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to stay alert, but the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Just as I was about to nod off, I heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Pleading, desperate. I stood up, trying to pinpoint the source. But the fog distorted everything, turning the world into a shifting landscape of shadows. I took a few steps away from the fire, my heart pounding in my chest. But the whispering stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I returned to the fire, shaken, but determined not to let my imagination get the better of me. The rest of the night passed without incident, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. When the first light of dawn broke through the mist, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The night was over, but the sense of foreboding lingered, hanging over us like a dark cloud. As we made our way back to the temple, the village seemed even more desolate in the daylight. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the full extent of the decay that had taken hold. The houses, once full of life, were now little more than hollow shells, their windows staring out like empty eyes. The few villagers we encountered were just as silent as before, their expressions unreadable. The temple looked different in the daylight, less menacing but no less mysterious. The bell tower loomed over us, its shadow stretching across the courtyard like a dark omen. We approached cautiously, the events of the previous night still fresh in our minds. Takashi led the way, his determination unwavering, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. We split up again, this time with a plan. Takashi and one of the others would explore the main hall, while the rest of us would investigate the surrounding buildings. I was paired with a woman named Emi, who had a quiet confidence that put me at ease. Together, we ventured into a small shrine adjacent to the main temple, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. The shrine was simple, almost austere, with only a few offerings left by villagers long gone. A faded tapestry hung on the wall, depicting a scene of what appeared to be a wedding ceremony. But as I looked closer, I noticed something unsettling. The bride's face was obscured, not by age or wear, but deliberately, as if someone had tried to erase her from the scene. Emmy noticed it too, and we exchanged a nervous glance. As we continued our search, the sense of unease grew. There was something wrong with this place, something that went beyond the usual tales of hauntings and restless spirits. It was as if the village itself was alive, watching us, waiting for us to uncover its darkest secrets. We found more strange artifacts, an old comb with strands of hair still caught in its teeth, a cracked mirror with no reflection, but no answers. We regrouped with the others in the main hall, where Takashi had made a disturbing discovery. Hidden behind a false wall was a small room, barely big enough to stand in, its walls covered in symbols that none of us could decipher. In the center of the room was a stone altar, stained with something dark and dried. Takashi speculated that it was blood, but I didn't want to think about what that might mean. As we stood there trying to make sense of what we had found, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the cold air. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the impression that something was in the room with us, something unseen, but undeniably present. I wanted to leave, but the others were determined to stay, convinced that we were on the verge of a breakthrough. We set up our equipment, hoping to capture some evidence of the paranormal. But as the hours passed, the only thing we recorded was the oppressive silence that had settled over the village. It was as if the entire place had gone still, waiting for us to make the next move. Takashi suggested we try to communicate with whatever was here, but I was hesitant. There was a line that I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. In the end, curiosity won out. We gathered around the altar, Takashi leading the ritual with a quiet intensity that belied his usual skepticism. He called out to the spirit, asking it to show itself, to give us a sign that it was there. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as we were about to give up, the bell in the tower above us began to toll, the sound deep and mournful, filling the temple with a resonant hum. The tolling of the bell was followed by a sudden gust of wind, blowing through the temple with enough force to extinguish our candles. We scrambled to relight them, but the wind kept coming, as if trying to drive us out. I could feel the presence growing stronger, more insistent, and I knew we had gone too far. Takashi, however, was undeterred, pressing on with the ritual despite the growing sense of danger. The wind died down as quickly as it had started, leaving us in an uneasy silence. The bell stopped tolling, but the echo of its sound seemed to linger in the air, reverberating through the temple and into the surrounding village. We were all on edge, every creak and groan of the old wood setting our nerves on fire. I could see the doubt creeping into Takashi's eyes, but he refused to admit defeat. As we prepared to leave the temple, the air grew heavy with the scent of flowers sweet, almost sickeningly so. It was out of place, a smell that had no business being in a place like this. I followed the scent to a small alcove, where a single withered bouquet lay on the floor. The flowers were old, their petals brittle and dry, but the smell was overpowering. I reached out to touch them, and the moment I did, a sharp pain shot through my hand, as if something had pricked me. I pulled back, staring at my hand in shock. There was no mark, no sign of injury, but the pain was real, a burning sensation that refused to fade. The others noticed my discomfort, but before they could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed through the temple. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. We turned towards the source, our hearts pounding, but there was no one there. Panic began to set in as the footsteps grew louder, surrounding us, coming from all directions. We huddled together, unsure of what to do, our senses overwhelmed by the relentless noise. Takashi tried to calm us down, insisting that it was just the wind, but we all knew better. There was something in the temple with us, something that didn't want us to leave. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the far end of the hall. I blinked, and it was gone, but the image was seared into my mind. It was a woman, dressed in a traditional kimono, her face obscured by a veil. I knew without a doubt that it was her, the spirit of Aiko, the woman from the legend. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the air leave my lungs. We had stirred something that was better left undisturbed, and now we were paying the price. The footsteps stopped suddenly, replaced by an oppressive silence that was even more terrifying. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the spirit's gaze on us, judging us, deciding our fate. Takashi, ever the skeptic, refused to believe what we had seen, insisting that it was just a trick of the light. But I knew better. I could feel the presence in the room, could hear the faint whispering that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. We had to leave, and we had to leave now. But as we turned to go, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping us inside. We were trapped with no way out and no idea what to do next. The atmosphere in the temple was suffocating, the air heavy with the weight of centuries of pain and suffering. We huddled together, desperate for a plan, but all we could do was wait, hoping that the spirit would show mercy. But deep down, I knew that mercy was not something we could expect from a soul so twisted by betrayal and anger. The hours dragged on, the tension in the room growing with each passing minute. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls were closing in on us. I could feel the spirit's presence, could sense her anger, her desperation. We had become part of the village's dark history, our fate sealed by our own curiosity and hubris. There was no escape, no way to undo what we had done. As the last echo of the temple bell faded into the night, I knew it was over. The doors creaked open on their own, revealing the fog-shrouded village beyond. But we didn't leave. We couldn't. The village had claimed us, just as it had claimed so many before. We were bound to this place now, our lives intertwined with its dark secrets. And as we sat there, waiting for the inevitable, I realized that we had become part of the legend, our fate sealed by the vengeful spirit, leaving the village to once again vanish into the mists, its secrets forever buried.